So now I would like to introduce and invite my friend and longtime Rotarian, Jonathan Goldman, to the stage. Jonathan's going to introduce Paul in a moment, but let me tell you a little bit about Jonathan for those of you who don't know Jonathan. He is the founder and managing partner of Genesis Capital, an independent investment and merchant banking firm, and has successfully led the completion of numerous mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, recapitalizations, principal investments, debt financing, restructurings, initial and secondary public offerings, and derivative hedging transactions. That's a mouthful. And in addition to all of that, and in addition to being one of our community's most respected financiers, Jonathan serves on several community, philanthropic, and company boards, personifying service above self. He serves as chairman of Children's Emory Pediatric Research Institute. He was the immediate past chairman of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and the chair of Children's Governance and Board Development Committee there. He's a lifetime trustee of the University of Texas McCombs School of Business Advisory Council and serves on the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce Board, the Atlanta Charity Clays Executive Committee, Camp Seagull Board of Visitors, and is a member of our club for a long, long time. We appreciate everything you do in service above self. I too don't know how you find time in the day to do it all. But now that Texas is part of the SEC, unfortunately, we have to have 3 or 4 conversations about that a year, which I never used to do. So please welcome Jonathan to the stage.
Thank you, President Adrian. Well, first of all, what a great introduction, but it's a little dated. I'm going to have to update my resume because now that Paul has taken over as chairman of the board of Children's Healthcare, Tommy Holder is the immediate past chairman at Children's Healthcare. So I wanted to just correct that, President Adrian. So thank you. It's a big privilege to introduce our guest speaker today. And Paul, thank you for the donuts and the coffee and for agreeing to speak with us today. Paul serves as co-founder and CEO of Inspire Brands, whose portfolio includes more than 33,000 restaurants, comprised of Arby's, Baskin-Robbins, Buffalo Wild Wings, Dunkin', Jimmy John's, and Sonic, making it the second largest restaurant company in the United States. In 2024, its brands achieved over $32.6 billion in system sales, supported by over 650,000 company and franchise team members. Before Inspire, Paul served as president of brands and commercial services at Hilton Hotels Worldwide. And prior to Hilton, he was president of Expedia.com and a partner at McKinsey. Paul is also very active in our community. As I mentioned, he serves in his other full-time job as chairman of the board of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and also several other important boards in our community, including the Georgia Tech Foundation and the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. Paul received his Bachelor's of Science in Management from Georgia Tech and an MBA and Master's of Engineering Management from Northwestern University, and he is a fellow of the Culinary Institute of America. So please, let's give a warm welcome to our fellow Rotarian, Paul Brown. Now, as Paul's making his way to the stage to start our program today, we thought we would share a video. And since our club is comprised of so many business and community leaders, this video is actually an internal video that they used with the Inspire leadership team at their most recent Inspire management meeting worldwide. And it really gives an insight as to what's going on in the company, both from an operational standpoint, with their consumers, and what's going on in their various communities globally. So if we could start with that video, that'd be great.
I only want good vibes around me tonight.
Yum. So Paul, you're looking dapper today. I meant to tell you that.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here today. I have to start by apologizing to a few guests that are here today that thought they were coming to hear an astronaut. They came and introduced themselves to me and said, are you the astronaut who's speaking today? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm sorry. Fast food astronaut. Well, sorry.
Well, it's better than following some other people. So, we shoot for the moon. That's all great. I failed to mention in my introductory comments that in addition to everything else, Paul also, up until recently, served as chairman of the board of Neiman Marcus. So in addition to his great business acumen, he also has wonderful fashion sense. So,
And good timing of selling a fashion retail
exactly.
company in December of 2024.
So Paul, when you started Inspire, it didn't look anything like what we just saw in the video. In fact, it wasn't even called Inspire Brands. And before you joined Inspire, you were a leader in one of the most prestigious hospitality companies globally. You were a high-powered executive. You got to travel the world, see all the sights, stay in all these luxurious hotels and resorts. So my first question is, what drove your thinking to exit that amazing position with all those perks and enter into a turnaround opportunity for a restaurant company in a very competitive industry? And as importantly, how did you convince your wife, Lisa?
Yeah. Well, I had always wanted to be a CEO, and I had been the number 2 person in 2 great companies, and I had just gotten on the backside of the 40s and kind of had that moment where if I'm going to do this, I need to start being serious about it. The person I work for at Hilton is amazing. He is still CEO today, so if I had stayed there, I would not be CEO. So I had that moment and started thinking about what kind of companies and what are the right opportunities. And the one thing about first-time CEOs is you never get a company on a silver platter, right? You generally give a company on a wooden platter with lots of splinters and those types of things. So, and Arby's had just been spun out of Wendy's and purchased by Roark Capital, and a classic private equity take private, and they were looking for a new CEO to come on board. And I took a look at it. There were a lot of challenges with the business. But it had a lot of similarities to things I've done in the past. It was obviously multi-unit, highly franchised, so there's a lot of similarities between restaurants and hotels. But also, I think, played to some of the marketing work I had done in the past at Expedia, and so felt that it was an opportunity. I also felt that, quite honestly, given the shape it's in, if I turn it around, it'll be a great home run. If I don't, nobody's really going to blame me that much anyway, so kind of less downside risk. And so, but no, the fact that it was also private equity based was really attractive to me, so made the move. Wasn't that hard actually to convince Lisa. She and I met while we were both at Accenture here in Atlanta, working on a big project with Delta Airlines, and she always had an affinity for Atlanta, so she was actually happy to come back. We had been in London, Seattle, and DC, and Chicago since we had left Atlanta, so she was happy to come back.
Well, congratulations on all your success today. You should be so proud. I saw a statistic where I believe that 75% of Americans will eat at one of your restaurants every year, which just kind of blew
hopefully
my
more
mind.
than one time, but yeah,
Yes,
no.
exactly.
But yes, given the fact that our portfolio is so broad and so many different use occasions, which is one of the theories we had in putting the portfolio together, it does just touch a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And actually we're now, yes, the second largest, and we're actually now the largest restaurant company in the U.S. by units. We passed that, I think, a year and a half ago. So,
well, congratulations. It's been so much fun watching your success from the turnaround of Arby's to Inspire and now integrating all these other brands. 2 questions. 1, when do you sleep? And then 2, what have been your guiding principles when you're leading such a fast-growing, ever-changing organization?
I sleep more or less just fine, like everybody else. Just depends.
You don't sleep a lot. I've seen your texts late, early.
Yeah, I do like to get up very, very early. It drives my team crazy. So, guiding principles, I think there's a few. First is, and I think some are obviously similar for any company, is have a clear sense of purpose and have a clear sense of values. Obviously, that is important in any company, but particular for a company that is moving very fast, for a company that's doing a lot of M&A, so actually the company changes. In fact, we were changing what the company was almost every 9 to 12 months for a period of time. Also in a highly distributed organization, meaning you have people all over the place, and in a highly franchised organization, right, where they are independent owner-operators, but you want them to actually, adhere to the values. And those values, and we call them core behaviors, are really the guardrails, if you will, that kind of hold everything together as you're kind of bumping around through such, crazy times, if you will. And that was one of the first things that we did when we created Inspire, and when we merged with Buffalo Wild Wings. That's kind of the founding of the company, is we as an executive team went off and said, what are going to be the values and core behaviors of Inspire? that would be complementary, hopefully, to any values of any company that we bought. And so we felt that's really kept us. If it's mavericks, allies, visionaries, achievers, and good citizens, those are our behaviors. And so we really try to adhere to that. The second is hire as much or more for will as you do for skill, or looking really for the potential, not just the past qualifications. That's actually one of the hardest things when a company's growing very quickly, is it can outgrow the management pretty quickly, particularly when you're doing big, chunky acquisitions. And so someone who might have been good in the job at the time, may be able to grow a bit, isn't able necessarily to grow fast. So recognizing people that have that will to just do whatever it takes, even if we can't really define what that job's going to be, but also can grow with the job, and have to make, unfortunately, quick decisions when you find that someone can't, because it can slow the whole company down. And we've had to make a lot of those difficult decisions along the way. I think the third is the only certainty is uncertainty. Now, I think you could say that about the world since March of 2020 generally, right? But you just have to learn to manage in that way, particularly when we started 2018 as Arby's and we ended 2018 as Arby's plus Buffalo Wild Wings plus Sonic, right? And so that's an example of no way going into 2018 could we have anticipated that we would have done what we did. And so, everything brought a new challenge. In fact, the first acquisition and integration, we kind of thought we knew what we were doing, but we found out in hindsight we really didn't. And so we had to continue to learn. I think those are the most important things.
Well, speaking of change, technology has clearly changed our lives, has changed all of our businesses, everything that we do and operate. Can you share with us what you're seeing and how is technology changing your business, and specifically with your customers and your employees?
I think that's what makes the restaurant industry, quite honestly, one of the most fascinating, exciting industries right now, is that how it's being transformed by technology. So if you go back to when I joined Arby's 12 years ago, it's hard to say, 12 years ago, restaurants, one of the most analog experiences that you can imagine, right? You walked physically into a restaurant, or you physically went through the drive-through. We had an interaction with you while you were physically present, and then the second you left, we didn't know who you were, you just disappeared. Right? We had no way of talking to you, interfacing with you, doing digital transactions were hardly a thing. Now you fast forward 12 years from then, digital transactions are 10 billion of our 33 billion in sales, and they're growing at 4 times the rate of sales, or overall sales. That obviously changes, quite honestly, everything. First and foremost, obviously, the transaction experience is a much more convenient experience for those that actually choose to transact that way. But we can now market to you. We know who we are. We can actually send you messages. We're not dependent upon mass television advertising, which is about the only way that you could ever advertise back, a decade ago. But also the data that gets spun off from that actually can transform the core aspects of the business model itself. So we can actually do revenue management. We can do the way that the hotel industry, because we not only know our prices, we now know the prices of every single restaurant around every single one of our restaurants, right, at an item level, because the data is out there. So now we can actually have a robust pricing models at an individual restaurant level, which was not possible before. If you think about labor and staffing models, we can get predictive analytics that says what we think the demand is going to be on Monday of next week in a sports bar. Therefore, how much labor do we need in the bar versus in the back of house, et cetera. And if you think about supply chain. So it has such a positive, transformative impact on this industry, and it's a $600 billion industry in the United States, it's a $2 trillion industry outside the United States. So it's really, I think, the last really large consumer industry to go through this. And so, but it's also part of the thesis of why we bought Inspire, or we created Inspire, because anyone who's gone through this kind of transformation in the industry who has done it, it's very expensive, very difficult. You have to attract a fundamentally different type of individual and convince them why they want to come work for a restaurant company versus any other company. So being at scale, helps with all of those. Having a portfolio of multiple brands helps with career pathing. And we just knew at the time when we created Inspire that this industry, there were just a lot of companies that were great individual brands in their own right, but they just weren't going to be able to make the level of investments to compete with the Starbucks and the McDonald's and the Yums of the world. And so by buying those individual companies and bringing them and attaching them to a common technology and capabilities platform, and doing it in a way that's actually not just scalable but extensible, and being able to do M&A well, was our whole thesis around it, and technology, again, was the foundational element.
It's impressive.
Okay.
It's
It's a
awesome.
fun industry.
Shifting gears for a second, but sticking on that theme, as President Adrian mentioned in his short introduction, I do a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and one of the things that you constantly hear about M&A is what happens on day two. You hear all these stories of the problems integrating companies on operations, on management, on culture, and not only have you done it successfully with 2 companies, you've now done it successfully with 6 companies. So as a leader, how do you think about getting people on a common integration culture, but also keeping the integrity of your brands separately because they have tremendous brand value to the consumer?
I mean, integration is a unique skill set. I mean, in my consulting days, I consulted with companies, many companies, as part of post-merger integration, and so I kind of knew the playbook. But doing it not as a consultant, but doing it particularly as the CEO brings a whole other set of dimensions that, the playbook doesn't necessarily show you, particularly the cultural implications of that, holding the thing together, doing it in a franchise environment where franchisees didn't become they didn't become Inspire franchisees, they became Buffalo Wild Wings franchisees, and they wake up the next day and there's a press release saying they're now part of this company they didn't even know existed. How do you hold it together? So, and also keeping those sets of values that make a brand in the eyes of the consumer, right? Because the consumer doesn't know or necessarily care that Dunkin' is part of Inspire. They want Dunkin' to be the Dunkin' they want to go to and have always wanted to go to. And so we worked really hard to keep the values that come with an individual brand remain the values of that brand in the eyes of the team members that work in those restaurants, the franchisees, and hopefully the experience comes out that way. But back to the core behaviors that we created Inspire, we actually created those with the intention that they would be additive or supportive. And in fact, they're more the core behaviors that we might talk about with a founder, if you will. And they actually kind of underpin and shore that up. But we really, really thoughtful around it. Also in how we organize. So if you were going for just pure cost out, you would centralize everything, right? And that's kind of the financial gravity of M&A and integration, right? Is let's get those cost synergies as quickly as possible. Therefore, we're going to put everything together under a shared services structure. And the answer is somewhere in between. And so we really thought hard around, or try to think hard around, what are the things that make an individual brand an individual brand? And let's keep those. We're not going to integrate those, and we're not going to bring them together. They're going to report hard lined up in the head of the brand. And those are, what's the food and beverage that we serve? How do we talk about ourselves, right? What's the experience in the restaurant, right? What's the experience with the franchisees? Those things, while we could get more cost synergies, quite honestly, if we put them in a shared services, we said no, they have to remain individual and specific to that brand. And so it's a balancing act. And I was fortunate to be in other companies that did M&A, Expedia and Hilton, and I saw this pendulum kind of go back and forth where they went a little too far in some cases or not far enough in other cases. And so I was able to build on that experience. And we made some adjustments along the way too.
So M&A integration growth has been phenomenal. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum, which is organic growth. And we all know as you get bigger and bigger, it's harder to move the needle on growth organically. But speak to us for a moment about the organic growth outlook for each of the brands, and I guess how you think about it not only domestically, and congratulations on being the #1 restaurant company in the U.S. now, but how do you think about continuing to grow in the U.S. as well as internationally? There's a lot of growth opportunity internationally as well.
Yeah, organic growth in the restaurant industry is paramount. If you look at how restaurant companies are valued by the public markets, the multiple is almost, really directly related to how quickly they're going to grow units. Obviously, you have to have individual unit economics for that to happen, but ultimately, how fast you're going to do it, and do it in ideally an asset-light way. And that's why restaurant stocks are generally get great multiples, are very attractive. But the second you aren't growing organically, it goes in the other direction very, very quickly. So yeah, that's why we think it's key to have in a portfolio. So first, while we're the largest in the United States by units, because it's across 6 different brands, we can be twice as big in the United States, even overly twice as big in the United States as we are today, just looking at market points that exist. And no other company close to our size can say that, right? Because if you look at, they're either a single brand that's gotten close to saturation, or if they're a portfolio, they have brands that have gotten close. So that's important, but each brand is not created equal. So not every one of our 6 brands is going to carry equal weight, if you will, around the growth. So obviously, disproportionately, Dunkin's going to be the bigger contributor, but also Jimmy John's and some others, which will generate that. And then outside the United States, we have 10,000 restaurants outside the United States, but it could easily be, pick a number, right? And so the key there, though, is to do it the right way. It's very easy to start planting flags around the world, to go signing deals, opening restaurants, and then you'll find yourself unwinding a lot of that a few years later. In fact, what we've spent the first few years after the Dunkin' acquisition was actually retrenching in certain markets because we shouldn't have been there in the first place, or certainly shouldn't have been there with the partner that we were with. And so kind of setting ourselves up and then grow. And also, what is the right incarnation of the brand for the market? What is the right Jimmy John's for South Korea? It had to have hot sandwiches. We didn't do hot sandwiches in the United States. And so we're selling 80% hot sandwiches in South Korea. And so you have to think about localizing these brands the right way, yet at the end of the day, they still have to have that integrity of the brand, because that's what the licensee is, right? So we open over 4 restaurants a day globally, 2 restaurants a day in the United States. But quite honestly, we'd like that to be a lot higher, and we're working on getting that at a much higher rate, because that's what the markets are going to want to see. What
geographies are you seeing as the prospects for the most upside growth, generally?
Well, if you look at, Dunkin' west of the Mississippi, so Dunkin' has obviously started in the Northeast. It's very, very prominent there. There are less Dunkin's west of the Mississippi than we have in Saudi Arabia. So there's the good and the bad of that. I can say that because I wasn't the person who left it that way. So no, but it just shows you the opportunity. In fact, the Pacific Northwest has been blocked for a while for various reasons. So opening that up is huge. That's more in the United States. And the same thing for some of our other brands that are still quite regional in nature. Actually, there's over 1,000 Sonics in Texas, right, out of the 3,800 Sonics, right? So there's lots of opportunity. And if you go outside the United States, we aren't in China. And we were a little bit in China a few years ago, but with the wrong partner, as I mentioned, so we actually started unwinding that. And so in a way that's turned into more of a positive story for investors than not. But India, we're the 3rd largest brand, basking over 1,000 baskins in India. So that's obviously a big growth opportunity. South America, Middle East. I mean, really, it's just, a lot of opportunities, just finding the right brand and the right partner.
Great. Okay, maybe we'll switch gears to a little bit more of a fun topic. Not that this hasn't been fun, but
growth is fun.
Growth is fun. And since you've joined the company, not only has the food and the service markedly improved, but the advertising's markedly improved. Yeah. And everybody in this room knows Ving Rhames' booming voice as the longtime face of Arby's. We have the meats. And it's continued to be amazingly successful, and I think it's even gotten more popular with age, like a fine wine. But more recently, in 2024, Dunkin' ran a Super Bowl ad called Dunkings. And Dunkings was voted by many of the polls and most everybody as the most successful Super Bowl ad of 2024. And as Paul mentioned, the brand has its roots in Boston. And so the whole premise of the Super Bowl ad was a fictional boy band starring some Boston celebrities like Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Tom Brady, and some others. So let's take a peek at that commercial if we can.
I don't think you should do this. Last year she came to my work. Now I gotta show her what I can do.
He's here.
Affleck on the track.
What up, Bronx? For your consideration, Boston Massacre! The Dunk Kings! Touchdown Tommy on them keys! Player coach.
Got it.
I'm open. And needs no introduction, my partner.
Sometimes it's really hard to be your friend.
You said you were gonna support me? Dunk Kings!
Don't go away. My heart, why you dunking me, girl? Why you dunking?
Dunk Kings!
My heart.
How do you like them donuts? I'm so
You
sorry.
had to see it, but I forgive you. Lay us on the track.
Are we gonna be on the album?
We talked about this.
Let's go. You're blinded by them pinstripes.
Wrap it up.
There goes Babe Ruth.
Tom, you can stay.
You remember when I told you I'd do anything for you? This is anything.
Chill. They're naming a drink after us.
That was definitely funny.
Given the huge success of this commercial, Dunk Kings 2 was made for Super Bowl 2025. And this caused everybody to come out of the woodwork, not only the original cast, but there was many others, Casey Affleck, Bill Belichick, and Bill's girlfriend, Jeremy Strong, Donnie Wahlberg. I mean, the list goes on, and I'm getting too old to know some of the other celebrities that were in there. And unfortunately, the video is too long to share today because it actually was a 7-minute, highly produced short movie that's gotten tens of millions of views over every social media and even direct media platform. So Paul, assuming nobody's recording this today, I know there's lots of fun stories and backstory information that came out of it, but can you share with the club how this all came about?
Sure. Because there's always a lot of backstory on these things. So it really started in 2023. That was our first Super Bowl ad with Duncan, with Ben. And what had happened is Ben approached us in 2022, and he and Matt were creating a new agency called Artist Equities, and they wanted Duncan to be their first client. They're passionate about Duncan, Boston. They thought they could do some fun things, and so they said, "Come, we want to be your first client, and we'll do some really innovative things. We'll tap into our network, et cetera, et cetera." And so they created the first commercial, and where they were filming in a Duncan, where actually it was a scripted thing where Ben was doing a bunch of things in a Duncan, and it was fine. But then the next day he says, "I want to come back and I just want to actually do some cameos." So he came back the next day and worked the drive-through window, complete cameos where people were pulling up and he would do he was just funny. And then surprisingly, J-Lo came. This is when they were still together. And she surprised him, and she pulls around in the car and actually places an order, and we have all that on film. And so we thought, that's really kind of magical. Maybe we can turn it into a Super Bowl ad. And I get asked all the time, it's like, how do you know that Super Bowl ads make a difference? They're very expensive. And I think it just depends on if it's a moment in the brand. And at that time, quite honestly, one of the things we wanted to do was send the signals to the franchisees that you were worried about us when we bought you, that we were going to cut all marketing expenses, we were going to starve the brand. Well, we're going to do a Super Bowl ad, which you've been wanting to do for over 50 years, and the brand would never let you do it before, so here we go, right? And so that kind of got it going. And so the next year, he wanted to do something even bigger and turned it into this really big event, which was more than we ever thought it would be. And then the reason this year, this is the real inside, so the reason this year turned into a 7-minute video is it was originally scripted to where there was going to be the Dunk Kings, and then the Dunk Queens were actually going to come at the end, and J-Lo was going to be part of it. Stuff happened, apparently, and so this gets being agile. The only certainty is uncertainty, so I think 3 weeks before the filming, and we got the notice that she wasn't going to come. And so the team started working around, can we find another Jennifer that actually, so we had Jennifer Aniston. She originally said yes, but then said no. We had, many others. And so the whole thing had to be rescripted. And so that's why it turned into what it did. It turned out to be fine, but it shows that you can't plan. And when you're dealing with celebrities, we figured out we will never write a script around a particular celebrity ever again.
Well, it turned out more than fine. And for those of you who haven't seen it, watch it. If you have 7 minutes, it's amazing. And it's turned into a cult classic almost. And, even the Dunkin' gear that's worn in the video has turned into a highly sought-after collectible item. So congrats on all that.
It
It's a
does,
lot of
though,
fun.
give an opportunity to highlight how marketing has shifted so much, right? And it's changing so rapidly. So, what made that successful was not really the Super Bowl ad. It was everything around it, all of the buzz around it, all the celebrity buzz around it, celebrities using their own channels, so not celebrity just as content the celebrity, but celebrity as channel the celebrity, and all the social media buzz and everything, and that's what works. And you'll see Dunkin', we're leaning more and more into that. So Sabrina Carpenter, getting Sabrina Carpenter to do the espresso, shaken espresso, wildly successful commercially, as well as obviously from a marketing exposure, because she brings a whole channel and set of followers. And so over time, we and most other companies are going to be dialing back the amount of money that's being spent, not just on TV media, but any kind of media, and more on content, more and more on social, more and more on influencers, because quite honestly, that's what we're seeing is moving the needle right now. But it changes the whole mindset. What is working media? What is non-working media? I mean, every single metric that any consumer company has used historically around marketing is being thrown out the door, because you have to think fundamentally differently about everything. And so that's the transition we're on.
Great story, and thanks for sharing the background. Before we open it up for questions, I just wanted to share a couple of statistics. This group all runs big businesses and big organizations, but I thought you'd appreciate some of these statistics. So at Arby's, you serve over 80 million pounds of beef annually. Baskin-Robbins, 40 million of gallons of ice cream annually. Buffalo Wild Wings, you're the largest seller of draft beer, tapping a keg every 20 seconds. Jimmy John's, each location makes over 11 miles of sandwiches each year. Sonic serves over 7.5 million gallons of cherry limeade each year. And at Dunkin', you serve over 2 billion cups of coffee annually. So now I'm going to put you on the spot. 2 questions. First, what's your favorite Inspire meal? And second, I know you love to cook. I've been in your kitchen, I've been in the test kitchen. What can you share with the club to maybe look out for some potential new food coming down the pike, if any?
Okay, so I'll run down. So if my favorite would be the Gyro from Arby's, the mint chocolate chip from Baskin, the original sauce wings from Buffalo Wild Wings, double espresso, I'm boring, double espresso from Dunkin'. They don't make much money off of me, unfortunately. The smash burger from Sonic, and then the spicy Italian toasted from Jimmy John's, because we now do toasted sandwiches in the U.S. If you haven't had them yet, they're fantastic. As far as what's amazing in this industry is that food technology has come such a long way that you can do things in mass, because if you think about it, when we serve any item, we have to be able to replicate it millions of times with a lot of part-time generally people that are working in the restaurants, and so it has to be able to scale and it has to taste good. And so sous vide technology, Arby's, a lot of people don't realize Arby's is the largest server of sous vide foods in the world, and it's because which allows us to actually have high-quality products that can come in. And you can do things like a great gyro, you can do things like a brisket, you can do things like a pulled pork barbecue sandwich where we sold 3 million of them in a month in a really high quality way. So there's a lot of innovation. And then beverage innovation is really exciting, right? What's happening with cold beverage innovation, going into energy beverages. Almost all the growth in Dunkin' is not in coffee at all. It's actually in all the other iced beverages. And that's exciting and fun. Colorful, right? Fun names. And so lots and lots of innovation there.
Well, thank you very much. As members come up to the microphone to ask Paul some questions, I want to start with 2, if I may. It's extraordinary scale and impact, huge economic footprint. You employ lots and lots of people. You're also a Rotarian. Give us your perspective on what we as a club, as business leaders and civic leaders here in Atlanta can do to make the biggest impact in our community in service above self.
I think I've worked in a number of cities, right? And Atlanta is incredibly special around the relationship and the network that the business leaders have, right? And I think we shouldn't take it for granted. I was in Rotary in other cities, and it wasn't the same, right? And so I think having that network, welcoming new people into the room, into the business community, being open and sharing knowledge, sharing learnings, and finding opportunities for others that to do great things, whether career-wise, is, I think, really important and shouldn't be taken for granted. It's really special.
We'll take that as a call to action. My second question is, and there's no media here today, Raphael might be interested in this, the T word, tariffs. How much are companies going to eat it, and how much are companies going to pass it on to their customers?
Well, I can't talk for other companies, but our industry actually at this moment in time is quite shielded from tariffs. The majority, most of what is produced or served is produced in the United States, and what is imported, for us, with the exception of coffee, comes from U.S. and Mexico, is generally underneath the USMCA. And so the tariff impact, at least for our industry and our mix of goods, is negligible, and I think we'll end up absorbing it. So coffee is the only one where there's a little bit of an exception to that.
Very interesting to hear. Clark, go ahead. Or Stephanie, you want to go first?
Thank you. For those of us in the room like myself who are navigating turnaround management and change, do you have any pointers for how you can revive or turn around a company? I'm thinking specifically Arby's. If you have any high-level tips for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think particularly if you're talking about a brand that was at one point very successful and then now is not as much, the first thing I think you do is go back and look at what was at the essence, at the core, what made it successful then. I don't mean go copy literally what it was what was happening 50 years ago, but look, what was its, how was it actually positioned against competitors? Why were people coming there? What was the essence of it? And then try to find the current modern incarnation of that. And that's a lot of what we did with Arby's, that over the years, it's particularly in fast food, it's easy to start just copying others, and all of a sudden you might find yourself in just being a worse pick a name, right? Because you can't actually do it as well as they're doing it, but you're kind of copying it, right? And so all of a sudden you now find yourself a worse them versus a better you, right? And so I think you have to kind of step back and say, we have to ultimately be the best us, and learn by what our competitors are doing, but not blindly. And so it had just kind of gotten too, pick a company, copying it a little bit too much. And so I think that's really important. Now, can you execute on that, right? Can you do that in today's environment? How do you break through if you actually don't have the scale? Those are some of the bigger challenges, but I think it starts with that and getting everybody to believe that that is actually the path to be on.
Clark?
Awesome. Well, and kind of leaning in on that, I remember one of the first times you took this stage, you were well along with the turnaround at Arby's, and I think so many of us are really impressed by the idea of really reimagining the vision of that restaurant. You made it fun. Like something like roast beef wasn't fun. You made it fun. And I don't go around like memorizing like mission statements, but that one sticks with me, inspiring smiles through delicious experiences, which I thought was just such a cool and compelling way to build a culture. What would you say right now, where there's a lot of organizations in the room, there's organizations and politics and everything else, trying to create bold visions? What lessons do you take as a leader who really created a bold vision and were able to rally folks around to create a really incredible enterprise would you give for folks that are really trying to crystallize visions at their own organizations? I mean, I think it's really, really hard. I'll even talk, about Inspire and Arby's. It's a lot easier, I think, to be bold when you really don't have that much to lose. Right? Arby's in 2013, 2014, we didn't have a ton to lose. We had to, and we didn't have a lot of media money. We absolutely had to be out there and taking risks. And in part, we also helped by every time we did something that was a little quirky or funny, it was actually even quirkier or funnier because it was Arby's doing it, right? And at the time. And quite honestly, I'll be honest, as we've grown, we've lost some of that. Now we're trying to get back, not just at Arby's, it's just because it's harder, because the risk is by definition numerically bigger, right? And then the bigger a company gets, the more individuals, even if they are mavericks, which is our core behavior, and nature, play it a little safer.
And so I think it's incumbent upon the CEO to celebrate failure, as long as we learn from it. Repeated failure for the same thing, probably not a good thing, but celebrate failure and make it okay. And then push people harder. And in some cases, if those individuals can't push harder, unfortunately, you have to make some hard decisions about the individuals. But I think that's the thing, you just got to keep it going. But it does get harder the bigger you get, it really does.
We have time for 2 more questions. No statements, questions, Jeff.
Yeah. Now I have to think of it. No, I'd like you to make the case for franchising. I bet when you went to Northwestern for an MBA, you probably never heard the word franchising once. I never did teaching at Guzway to business school, so I brought it in. Seems to me it creates a lot of capitalists. People of color have had a lot of opportunities to be capitalists. Could you make the case for it? Because no one ever talks about franchising.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a uniquely American business model. And it is an amazingly powerful business model. And actually, academic institutions are catching on. I guest lecture at Harvard Business School every year in a class on franchising. And it's one of the most attended classes from all over. What makes it a great model? If you look at it from both parties. So let's start from the franchisees party, right? You, as an individual owner-operator, you're not an expert necessarily in marketing and branding. You actually need to go out and get financial assistance, right? The ability to actually attract capital as an independent owner-operator, a new one, if you're actually doing a tried and true concept, is fundamentally different, right? You can let the franchisor do a lot of the things that you may not be an expert in, culinary, for example, or in our case, or marketing, et cetera, and leverage that system, leverage the infrastructure in a way that you can then focus on your individual owner-operator, your individual business, in a way that actually you probably wouldn't be if you're trying to particularly start a business with all those other aspects that you have to come to play. But the financing can't discount the ability to get financing, right? On a franchisor standpoint, it is a capital light model. It is, you're able to grow and actually not have to utilize your balance sheet nearly as much. Wall Street loves that. I'd say it works really well when you have a well-defined model that you are stamping out more and more of them. Franchising is a really difficult model if you're having to change what you are, right? So if it's not working, or you have to turn a brand into something fundamentally different, because now you have to steer the ship with a bunch of franchisees that sign contracts that you're legally obligated to. So and I get asked a lot of time from someone who has a concept of 10 or 15 units, and should I start franchising them? And I would say, once you start, right, you have to be committed to it, so unless you perfect that model. But it is a great thing, and it has allowed the U.S. to actually create a community of entrepreneurs in a way that just doesn't exist in other countries, because they can come in, tried and true model, get readily access to financing because the model's been proven, and then just run it very aggressively. So it's a phenomenal model, really.
Zach, bring us home.
Question, Adrian.
Thank you.
What did you do during COVID? And did you do it right?
COVID, our brands had very different reactions during COVID, right? So Sonic, 100% car-driven brand, went through the roof. And so it was an incredibly positive time. Buffalo Wild Wings went from being a sports bar to no bar, no sports. And so we had to transform that business model entirely to off-prem and entirely about food, not even beer. And by the way, we had to work in a country where we had 600 different rules and regulations across 1,200 restaurants for Buffalo Wild Wings, right? So I think what we did well was using the learnings of one brand to actually help drive another. For Jimmy John's, we stood up pop-up drive-thrus for all the Jimmy John's because we were operating so many other drive-thrus in other restaurants. So we did a good job of that. I think we did a good job of transitioning Buffalo Wild Wings to being digital and off-prem, which has allowed us to create a whole new concept called Buffalo Wild Wings Go. I think what we didn't do well is we relaxed operating standards in hindsight, right? It became more about keeping them going, right? Keeping the restaurants open and operating, hire who you could because there wasn't a whole labor, there's a lot of things. And then we didn't pivot quickly enough back to the operational rigor that you needed once COVID was over. right, which we've now been doing. So I think we were too slow, just being brutally honest, I think we were just a little too slow to pivot back to non-COVID behaviors, right? And so we're kind of having to go back and rebuild that muscle. But the restaurant industry in general fared better than most because of the ability to pivot off-prem. And I think the residual impact in many ways, pushing everybody more digital, more online ordering, has been a net positive to the business, though I would never want to repeat that experience again.
As you said a moment ago, the only certainty is uncertainty, something we need to learn about. Before we thank Paul and Jonathan, I wanted to call out the last 3 programs of this Rotary year. So astronaut Shane Kimbrough will be here in 2 weeks' time, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't read your missives. He was the former commander of the International Space Station and has Atlanta roots. So please bring all your sons out from near and far. That's always a fun program. I talked about the Atlanta Way being a special place, 2.0. That'll be the penultimate program. And I am super excited about next week's speaker. I don't know, David, how you pulled it off, but we've got Brian Stevenson coming to the club. There will be no media here. This is in direct response to Mayor Andre's challenge to this club in December to start talking about recidivism and what we can do as employers and civic leaders around criminal justice reform. And so if you haven't got time to read the book Just Mercy between now and Monday, call the movie up on Netflix where Brian's paid by Jamie Foxx. So kudos to you for bringing him to the club. Paul, you're very busy. Thank you so much for making time to come to the club. Your insights are wonderful, masterfully led, Jonathan. Thank you so much for the time you put into it. So let's all give them a warm round of applause. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.